Welcome to Peter and Ruffy's Football Show. 30 years ago this very day, Scottish football lost one of its greatest managers while he was in control of the Scotland international side in a World Cup qualifier against Wales. Tonight on Peter and Ruffy's Football Show, it's a tribute to Jock Stein. And it doesn't get any better than three men who knew him very well. Our boot-room guest tonight, Alan Rough, as you would expect, takes his place alongside one of the finest broadcasters of Scottish football in Archie Macpherson, and a Lisbon Lion, no less. Jim Craig is our third and final guest. Delighted you guys could join us here tonight to talk about Jock. I suppose the first question is, what is your abiding memory of the great man?
His organisation abilities, because he came in, Peter, to Celtic in 1965. The last trophy had been the League Cup final of 57, when Rangers were beaten 7-1. There was a great euphoria at that time, but after that, that team broke up. Like Charlie Tully and Bertie Peacock left. Bertie Ord went to Birmingham City. Pat Crerden was transferred to Man United. And the club was in a really, really rough spell. Nothing much was happening. And he came in, and within 2 years, of course, he revolutionised everything. And it's just sheer presence that you remember more than anything else.
The thing that's lucky for me, Archie, is knowing you as I do. You know, it's one of those things where a journalist would swap places with you because you were born and were able to work in an era where the footballers that we had at our disposal were unbelievable. But to actually be there and know and scratch the surface of a manager like Stein?
Well, at the time you didn't know you were in a golden age, but by comparison with what we have now, and I'm not being stupidly disparaging of football at the moment, but nevertheless, if you had to make comparisons and look at your history properly, it was a golden age. And he'll long be associated with that golden age, relatively speaking. I mean, at the time, people like Ernie Walker would say, would be looking back maybe 10 years. He said, you would say it was a golden age. We never won anything. Well, the international team didn't win anything, but Jim won something, and Rangers won something in Barcelona, and we had Gothenburg. And in that period, Stein, who was the trailblazer. I mean, somebody said to me today, was he the best manager ever? I said, well, you've got to take into account that a man went south to Manchester and did remarkable things. Very successful in a different kind of environment and so on. But if you consider that Stein set the template, he was a trailblazer, and Sir Alex copied him. He picked him up, picked up his habits, picked up the way he dealt with players, with the media, is almost identically. What he did, Peter, was this. When Jock was there, Jock fermented within the media their bias. Alec did the same up at Aberdeen about the West of Scotland press against Aberdeen. In that sense, being the trailblazer, I put him numero uno.
Ruffy, the great thing about Archie, as we'll find out later in the programme, he had some great ding-dong battles with him. We'll find out some horror stories of players trying to pull the wool over Jock's eyes. But from your point of view, at international level, you regarded him as a man way ahead of his time.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. I mean, Jim had the privilege of working with him day to day. You know, I was coming from club to international, which was maybe one international a month at that time. And it just, when you were in his presence, there was an aura there, wasn't there, Jim?
Very much so, yeah.
And respect as well. And it didn't matter what he said, you know, it was gospel, and you took everything in. As Jim's already touched on, his team talks were legendary. You would come out of team talks and you would know exactly what you were doing. And he was the kind of guy that he upped your game. I don't know if Jim would know what I'm talking about. He made you a better player, you know. He gave you somewhere to reach, you know, and you couldn't fall short of that. And that's what was good for me, you know, coming from a small club like Partick Thistle. You upped your game and you became a better player.
I wonder if you two guys can give me a little insight into this. Archie, obviously you've written 2 books about the great man, and having, you know, spent that time with him, Jim, and getting the education that you did from him as a manager. How much do you think, you know, the forming of Jock Stein as a manager was set with the 3 years that he had coaching the reserves, so he kind of had an insight into them? he did go out and watch the great Hungarian side in 1954. He was able to actually see other people, the way they played, and he was able then to translate the good bits of them to you guys.
Yes, but I think you've got to go back to his playing career. First of all, I mean, it was a really unusual career because he had a few years at Albion Rovers, then went down to Llanelli. And when he came up, ostensibly to be the linchpin in the reserve team, Celtic's 3 normal centre-halves were all injured. And he got his place in the first team and kept it for the next 4 years before the injury kept in. So he had a playing career behind him, first of all. And then the work with the reserves, where they all thought he was terrific. At the same time, as I've mentioned, the first team at that time wasn't doing particularly well. And then he told me himself the big game that made a difference for him was Real Madrid versus Eintracht, the 1960 European Cup final. When he saw Real Madrid play, he told me he realised that with the exception of the centre-half, who he wanted to be thou shalt not pass, the attacks had to come from all the other players, because that made life very difficult for the opposition.
Well, you know, I think his managerial ability wasn't commensurate with his ability on the park as a player, and that was his strength. In my view, it was his strength, because if you're not as good as you would like to have been, you can maybe impart that to other players.
No, but what I mean is it's a good basis for learning.
Yeah.
The fact that you've played in that position, centre-half, and you know what's going on. And then you get an education, which he got, obviously, at other clubs. I mean, after Celtic, to go to Dunfermline, whom he took to, semi-final place in Europe, in the Cup Winners' Cup.
Played a sweeper.
Yeah, and then Hibs won the Summer Cup as well. He had a lot of success before he came to Celtic Park,
Yeah, and with that in mind, did you sense, and this is the thing, as Archie has mentioned about hindsight's a wonderful thing, but did you sense when he was back, when he slowly but surely started to implement his ideas? I mean, I think Lord Jimmy Gordon said, what a season you've just had there, which is, incredible. But did you sense at the start of it, we could go through this entire season unbeaten or winning everything?
No, because it never works like that in football. I mean, you've got to get the basics right. And when he came in, he was very lucky to have players who could do what he wanted. He wanted 2 fullbacks who could come forward and attack. Now, I shall keep the gentleman's name to myself, but Tam Gemmell was told a year before Stein turned up that if he crossed the halfway line once more, he was not playing the next week, because defenders were defenders in those days, and this new idea of an attacking defender was relatively new. So he had 2 attacking defenders in Gemmell and myself. He had 2 midfield players in Murdoch and all. They had guys up McNeil and Clark, McLean and Clark in the middle of defence, and up front 2 blazing wingers in Johnson and Lennox, and in between that your combination of Joe McBride, Stevie Chalmers and Willie Wallace. So everything was there for him, and it was just his way of getting the mechanics right and putting everybody in the right place and getting people to play with each other. And of course, it had to be done, as your opening piece says, the right way. Football had to be entertaining and successful, right? And both of those are important.
Yeah. I mean, did you sense, Archie, then, as you're watching this team develop, through 66, 67 and the years where he really got to his peak and back to another European final, what was your relationship with him when you realised that you were literally following a team that were, trailblazing across Europe?
Sure. Well, first of all, I didn't anticipate they would go on and win the European Cup final. I think few people outside of the Celtic camp themselves, when they got to the semi-final, thought that they would. But he had this, I dismissed the word charismatic about him. He was a much more stronger personality than that. It was almost as if his whole life was a belief in aggressive step forward, never resting. And I remember when you mentioned him going abroad to find out about other things. He went with a deputation of Scottish managers to Milan to see Helene Herrera. I remember him telling me years later that it wasn't so much the tactics that he picked up from them. I think Jock was wise enough to know what was going on in the modern game, what was effective and what wasn't effective. He says it was discipline. I realised the rigid iron discipline of Italian football, where players were treated very much in exclusion like monks.
Yeah.
And he felt that himself. Now, I'm not sure, Jim will tell you more about how he ran his team all the way through. I wasn't privy to that. But that's what he said to me. There had to be a basis of one, fitness, and secondly, discipline, breeding self-discipline. And that's what he got from Italy, from Helenio Herrera, before he went out and beat him.
Listen, the great thing about the programme, it could be a 4.5-hour show by the time we finish with these guys, but we'll be back after the break with even more from Archie Macpherson, Jim Craig and Alan Rough, reflecting on the late great Jock Stein. Welcome back to Peter and Ruffy's Football Show. Delighted that our boot-room guests joining Alan Ruff and myself, Archie Macpherson and Lisbon Lion Jim Craig. So much to talk about through his career. I don't think we could fill even a fraction of it in this programme, but nevertheless we will attempt to just scratch the surface of the man. And one of the things I was dying to ask you, Jim, is there a specific speech prior to a game? Was there some speech that he used to deliver, or was it the way he delivered something that inspired you to go out there?
He didn't say very much before a game. That had all been done the day before, and there was not a great deal of discussion before the game. But I do have one really memorable moment, because we had played, I think it was after we beat Rangers in the Scottish Cup final '69. It was a really brutal game, a lot of very tough tackling. The referee had hard work in his hands controlling the kind of temper of the game. And both teams were taken up before the SFA for a talking to after that. And I was quite surprised. I'd forgotten all about that, but I saw a photograph of us coming out of the SFA offices. Anyway, we played Rangers again a few months later, and the boss wasn't in the dressing room before the game. And he suddenly came in and said, "Gentlemen, just a wee second, the chairman would like a word with you." So Sir Robert Kelly, who probably at that time was Sir Robert and not Bob Kelly, came in, and Jock stood beside him and closed the door, and the chairman said that the last time we played this particular team, football had been the loser. A lot of incidents, a lot of tough play, and it's not good for the image of football. And although it's important to win, we must cut out any kind of stuff like that and make sure that the game at the end of the day is the winner. So, are you finished? Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Chairman. OK, Sir Robert, thank you very much indeed. So he motioned them out the door, and he shut the door behind him, and then he leant against the door and said, "Well, you can forget all about that for a start." 50-50, you'll win it automatically. 60-40 against you, you'll have a damn good try at it.
You know, when you talk about team talks and preparation for a game, this is something Jim knows only too well, a famous occasion which showed you that Stein could create his own myths and legends by dint of personality. Dukla Prague. Dukla Prague was a superb, apparently defensive performance by Celtic. They thumped the Celtic that night, couldn't score, great result, and they got into the European Cup final. After which, Jim will verify this, statements were made like Bob Kelly at the time, "We'll never play defensive again, I'm ashamed of that, And Stein in the press said, "Yes, but we had to." Well, in writing my book, I talked to players like Jim, he knows this only too well, Bobby Lynott. Bobby Lynott said, if the big man had told me in the team talk that I had to play defensively, then I must have missed the team talk. He said, I saw the late lamented Jimmy Johnson about it, the same thing. He says, no, I couldn't get the ball. I had to come back and get it. Stevie Chalmers said to me exactly the same thing.
Right.
It was a brilliant piece of PR by Stein.
Yeah.
Jim.
Yeah, that's true, yeah. We weren't supposed to play that way, but in fact there was one classic occasion where I got the ball from Ronnie and I came running forwards, and I got to the halfway line and there was two roars from the dugout. One said keep going, the other one said get back, you know. So it's a wee bit difficult at a time like that, you know, because nobody was in front of me. Everybody was kind of lined up on the halfway line because, you know, they now thought we better not go any further.
Yeah. And the other one, Jim, a classic, which you can attribute to this ability to make legends. The famous night where Jimmy Johnson was apparently told at half-time in the bog, if you go out and score, you don't need to fly to wherever it was.
Red Star Belgrade.
Unfortunately for that story, Roger Bailey wrote about it the Sunday before the game.
Yeah.
because Jock had told him that's what I'm going to do, and yet everybody went along with it.
As Jim said, you know, talking away from the football side, the other, you touched on it as well, and Jim said as well, you could never pull the wool over his eyes. But as a football player, that has to be tested, and you got caught. You got caught every time. I don't think there was occasions in it, and even away from the game, you knew when he was setting you up. I don't know if you remember, we went to Romania, and Jock was in charge of the under-23 side, and we won 2-0, and we stayed in this lovely hotel. And after the game, we had a meeting, and he said, "Great result, fantastic result. I want you to go out and enjoy yourselves. Have a right good bucket. You have really deserved it. Just go out and enjoy yourself." And I turned around to Kenny Dalglish and went, "I bet you there's nowhere to go." And I was right, there wasn't anywhere to go.
I cannot believe for a minute, Ruff, you never found somewhere. Listen, there's no point in trying to fit into this programme a chronological order of his achievements. There's a couple of things I really want to get your thoughts on before we finish what is, you know, a short tribute to a great man. Do you think there were any regrets?
We underestimated Feyenoord, definitely. You know, this is going to sound like the dark ages, but you must remember back at that time, I had never seen Feyenoord player. None of us had seen Feyenoord player because there weren't games on television to watch them, and there was no sort of films or anything like that at all. So somebody went to see them and came back and said they would do this and they would do that. And I always find that very unsatisfactory because, as you well know, Alan, as a right back, my immediate opponent was the left winger. Now, he made or broke my day, and I wanted to ask questions about him, like, how quick is he? How quick is he over 5 yards? Is he better over 10, 20, 30, 40? And I wanted to know all those things before the game started. You never got that information, you know, because the guy who had gone to see them would be more concerned with an overall plan rather than individual things.
Here's one for you, Archie. Should he have been knighted?
Well, in terms of what happens in football now, yes, of course he should be. But that's a retrospective consideration. I think it was right for the club to go for the knighthood. Or you see, these knighthoods, you don't get to pick and choose. Somebody had once said that Jock bypassed this and suggested Sir Robert Kelly instead. That's a lot of nonsense. The honour system doesn't work like that. No. So in that sense, in a retrospective sense, and of course he was big enough simply to take what it was. My big regret, sadly, is about himself. He knew he was an ill man, Peter. That time he went to Cardiff, he wasn't taking his medicine. He was taking a diuretic because the build-up of water in his body. And the doc at the time told me he was too proud a man, because if you take these diuretics, you're going to the toilet every 10, 15 minutes. You know, that's what it's for, to get the water out of the body. He wouldn't do it. So in the 2 days before the game, because it would have interrupted team talks, it would have and it would also have made him, and Jim will understand this, vulnerable. And he didn't want to be seen vulnerable. He didn't do it. And a combination of factors like dragging the photographer out the way, and then that, it's hypothetical, of course, but the doc said if he'd done that, that hadn't happened at that time, maybe.
Could I go back to just the knighthood bit for a second there, Peter? It was the way of the establishment at the time. The guy at the top, the field marshal, Sir Robert Kelly, got the total award for winning in Lisbon, right? The general in the field, Jock Stein, gets the CBE, and the guy in the front line, captain of the troops, Billy, get the MBE, and the troops get nothing because you're just there to follow a lead. And that was the way it was thought of back then. And it would be different now, to be quite honest.
Sure.
Well, I have to say, listen, you guys were some foot soldiers, even without nothing. You left us with so many wonderful memories. Ruffy, Archie just touched on it there. 1985 for every one of the players and the nation was a really sad day. We wonder, 62 is too young to die.
Yeah, it certainly is, and like Archie was saying there, I noticed that he wasn't particularly well in the 2 days before it. We didn't have goalkeeping coaches then. Jock took the goalkeepers and he used to put us through our paces, and I think the three of us knew that he wasn't particularly well, but never actually worried about it because, as Archie said, he just got on with it. You know, he wouldn't show anything at all. So you're right, you know, to play in such a high-profile game like that and to win, and we're all celebrating on the park, not knowing what was going on inside, was a horrible experience.
Did you actually see the incident?
I could see it from where I was. You know, I could see something was happening. But in the dressing room for that hour after, it was the longest hour ever in my professional career.
Listen, we've run right out of time, and it just shows you how short this show is when you're trying to pack it all in. Can you come up with a word briefly that sums them up from your perspective, Jim?
Well, from my point of view, unforgettable, because you know,
Yeah.
if it hadn't been for him, none of it would have happened.
Indestructible because his memory still exists.
I would just say he was a legend.
Doesn't get any better than that. I'm sure we could sit here for longer and wax lyrical about Jock Stein. I could sit longer with Archie and Jim and talk about their own careers as well. I'm sure we'll do that at some point in the future. I couldn't sit with Ruffy relentlessly. 6 days is enough at the moment, to be honest with you. But I'm sure we'll get round to it over a beer someday. I hope you enjoyed it. If you do get a chance, listen, Jim has got a new website out, Jim's Football 50, and he has some more great stories, and it's well worth getting onto it to hear more from Jim Craig as well. Thanks to Jim Craig, the Lisbon Lion. Thanks to Archie McPherson for joining us, and from Ruffy and myself, good night.